Good afternoon, committee, and welcome to Senate Utilities Committee, and welcome to everybody in the audience today. We're going to have a couple budget hearings coming up. Just one quick note about the agenda. We have a winter storm coming in Wednesday, and so the agenda may be altered. I have not talked to leadership yet. But my guess is that Wednesday may be a tough travel day for a lot of senators. So watch for that. We'll probably make a final determination and final announcement tomorrow on that and try to make a decision on what to do. Senator Francisco, do you have a comment on that?
I was wondering if we should encourage the Southwest Power Pool representatives to stay at home.
I think, well, they might. Do we have a comment? Well, I think they're coming on Thursday, and so we might be able to do them remote and see how we can do that. But we would like to hear from them. And we'd also planned on potentially final action on Wednesday, so we may have to defer some of that as well. So the bottom line is we'll be fiddling with the agenda a little bit this week, so we'll try to be as communicative as humanly possible. Before we get started, are there any bill introductions from the audience or from the committee? Seeing none, I think what we're going to do is start with our hearing on agency budget first for the Citizen Utility Ratepayer Board. We would like to try to hear these and possibly work them today and get them out if humanly possible. We'll kind of gauge the intent of the committee after we hear it. But at any rate, let's start off with Victoria Potts. Give us the overview of the CURB budget. Victoria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, my name is Victoria Potts with Kansas Legislative Research. I'll be working first off the white document in front of you that says Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board in front of you. And just a very brief reminder of how a budget hearing works. Many of you were here last year, but just as a brief reminder, first I will present, and then a representative of the agency will present. And then as Senator Peterson said, you will make recommendations on a budget. So you can add money, delete money, tell the agency they're doing a really good job, anything like that. So we'll do that hopefully at the end of the meeting. So again, still looking at that white document for Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board. I just wanted to note firstly that CURB receives no state general fund, so it is entirely fee funded. On that white document, pages 1 and 2 are summary information. So I'll move straight ahead to page 3. On page 3, looking at that second graph, as I mentioned, CURB is entirely fee funded. So you'll see a graph relating to their utility regulatory fee fund and its expenditures over time. Moving on to I'll move straight to page 5. On page 5 is where we start our current year analysis. So we're currently in fiscal year 2022. Looking at that page 5, I'll start with the agency estimate. The agency estimates revised expenditures of $1.1 million, all from special revenue funds, which is an increase of $99,000 above the fiscal year 2022 approved amount. That $99,000 is due to agency carryover. So the agency is permitted in the appropriations bill to carry over unspent funds for consultants. This year, that amount added up to $99,000, so that's the increase from the agency's approved budget. And still on page 5, the governor concurs with the agency's fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. And I'll move straight ahead to page 7. On page 7, you're looking at the fiscal year 2023 analysis. The agency requests $1.2 million, all from the Utility Regulatory Fee Fund for fiscal year 2023. This is an all funds increase of just about $90,000 above the fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. That $90,000 is caused by a couple of things. So that first item, the agency has an enhancement request for an attorney position. So the agency notes that They're experiencing an increased number of cases filed and increased complexity of those cases, so there's an additional need for an attorney position. Number two, they've also requested an enhancement for an accountant position. Similarly, as cases increase in number and complexity, the agency feels there's a need for an in-house accountant, so they requested funding for that. And both of those increases are partially offset by a decrease of those carryover funds. So I mentioned there's $99,000 in fiscal year 2022 of carryover. Those funds are not in fiscal year 2023, so that offsets the increase caused by those enhancement requests. And at the bottom of page 7, the governor has again concurred with the agency's fiscal year 2023 request. And finally, if you turn the page to page 8, on page 8 is just a little bit more detail about that attorney FTE position request and the accountant FTE position request that I mentioned earlier, including the amounts for salaries and wages, computer equipment, and office furniture. And Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions on CURB's budget.
Thank you, Victoria. Committee, any questions for Victoria on the budget? Seeing none, thank you, Victoria. Next, we'll hear from David Nickel, who's Consumer Counsel for CURB. David?
Good afternoon. I'm David Nickel. I'm the Consumer Counsel for the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board. It's always a pleasure to speak to this committee. Thank you very much for considering our budget this year. I'm going to walk through the performance-based budgeting metrics that we provided to the Senate committee. Starting on page 4 of the performance-based budgeting metrics. Those are our metrics for fiscal year 2021. As the committee can see, we've intervened in 100% of all KCC cases that pertain to ratepayer impacts. We do not automatically intervene in cases like certificates of convenience or those types of line sightings, those types of matters, as they do not have a material impact upon consumers, but any other case we're involved in. Our savings this fiscal year 2021, is the amount of about $500,000 in terms of what it would cost to fund our agency if we were to do the work from private versus funding our agency. So there's a savings that amounts to that. As the committee can see, we also are involved before the legislature, and we're involved in an outreach program to talk to consumers. We do that through our website, we do that through the telephone, and we do that through a newsletter that we publish quarterly. So we're involved in that aspect. And then the last aspect of that is that we are involved in policy research. Turning to page 5, if you look at that, you'll see that 53% of our time was spent on KCC matters during fiscal year 2021, 25% involved in policy work, and 14% involved in terms of outreach. So we've been active in those aspects. The 3-year comparison of our PBB metrics show, again, over the 3-year period that we're involved in 100% of all the rate cases that are filed before the KCC. On an average basis, 98.5% of all KCC cases that pertain or have a significant impact on ratepayers. It is important to note that in KCC rate cases, on a 3-year average, we've saved the consumer ratepayer $90 million on an average basis. That's with a budget of about $1 million, so we've actually provide significant value to our constituents. The more telling thing, and the reason that we're here or ask for the enhancements, are shown on page 10 and 11 of the metrics. I'll give you a moment to take a look at those or locate those. They're significant. They're telling. As you can see, from first half of fiscal year 2020 and first half of fiscal year 2021, we spent about 53 to 55% of our time on KCC dockets. In first half of fiscal year 22, that's increased to 77%. That's an increase of over 50% from the time that we were spending on KCC cases in fiscal year 2020. So it's significant. And what that means is that we don't have time to really look at policy research. We don't have time for outreach programs. We spend all of our time working on KCC matters. Policy research is a very important aspect of our representing residential consumers. We intend to add value to any rate case that we're involved in, any KCC case that we're involved in. The only way to do that is to provide best practices, look at and study the issues, and come up with something. I've got before me, I'm just showing you, that I've been working in the last couple years on trying to present a best practices paper on energy efficiency. I work most Saturdays. I work probably somewhere between 3 and 5 hours per Saturday. I have not even been able to get to this in the last 2 years. I spend all of my time really looking at KCC cases on Saturdays. So we really do need the enhancements to be able to do our job with that. The second reason that we really need those enhancements is that we're a very small agency. We have 7 staff members completely. There's a learning curve with utility matters of about 3 to 5 years, probably on the outside 5 years, and that's probably to really get your feet down and really know what you're doing. If we lose an analyst or we lose an attorney, we go back to square one. It's very difficult. I've done that 2 times in my 6 years of being consumer counsel, both times extremely painful. It's hard to sit there and really start to know what the issues are, have analysts, to have attorneys do a great job before the KCC, and then take a step back because you have to learn, you have to train, and we're not doing what we should be doing. So those enhancements do a couple things. They allow us to do a better job before the KCC, before the legislature, and our policy research, and then more importantly, it allows us continuity between our staff members for doing those type of jobs. Wanted to point out that even if we get the enhancements, we are still below the average of all other consumer agencies that are in the NASUCA network. The average of agencies, consumer agencies in NASUCA is 8.5. That's actually dated information. It's probably gone up from then. The average budget is $2.4 million. We're significantly below that. And I think we provide value. There's a number of things that we're involved in. Obviously, Winter Storm Uri is one of those cases, and all those cases are pending. So far, we've recommended in those cases savings in the amount of $62 million for ratepayer consumers relating to carrying cost of those amounts. We're pleased to announce that we're now looking at an energy efficiency docket that's now been filed before the commission. Energy efficiency not only represents an opportunity for least cost resources, but it also provides for an avenue for ratepayers to reduce their costs through energy efficiency. So we're excited about that, and we think that would add value to our constituency. We are working with the utilities and the KCC with regard to energy burden. There is a large percentage of Kansans in Kansas who can't afford their electric bills. And we're working with the utilities, we're working with the KCC to see if we can ameliorate some of those costs. We again think that will add value to our constituents. So bottom line is we believe that we do add value. We believe that we're funded reasonably, and we appreciate any help that you can provide to us in those regards. Stand for questions.
Thank you, David. Committee, open to questions. Senator Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I've been here a long time. It just, it seems to me your budget has just climbed quite a bit. I mean, I would like to see maybe 10 years back what it was, because I would say your budget's over doubled but I mean, just back in 21, you're at 900,000, then you jumped up to 1.1 million, and now you're talking 1.2 million. I don't know, your budget seems like it's climbing faster than most people's salaries are growing. I don't know, that's just me. To me, it looks like, you're spending way more money than you were, 5-6 years ago. And I mean, I could be just me, but you were about 860,000 just a few years ago, and now you're gonna be roughly 1.2 million. I mean, that's quite a jump to me, while people are struggling to get by.
It is a large bump with regard to where we are, but that really does not amount in terms of the overall cost of surcharges on utilities to be very much of an impact at all on consumers. More importantly, really what we're looking at, Senator, is just an increase in the number of cases that we're handling. Granted, I mean, back 2, 3, 4 years ago, we were spending 50% of our time on KCC matters, and even that was tough, to be honest with you. But at 77% of our time right now on winter storm on the KCC dockets, it's very difficult to get by. I'll be honest with you. We haven't even looked at COVID cases yet. COVID cases are going to have an impact on consumers. We don't have the manpower to do it. So we're here because we really do anticipate that we need the additional positions, and that's where that increase comes from. So appreciate your question. I hope that helps to answer what concerns that you have.
Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm understanding that although the budget increases between FY 2022 and 2023, about 100,000 of that is the carrying costs. So that will not mean additional charges to the utilities.
That's correct, Senator.
And then my other question would be, what do you foresee in terms of settling the cases from the winter storm? How much longer do you predict that might take? And this, I understand that's not easy to do.
Thank you. It's a great question, and thank you so much for asking it. We've got 7 different cases that are Winter Storm Uri related. Of those, we've actually settled 1 with regard to the plan to recover those expenditures from the ratepayers. We have 1 that's set for hearing on Friday. I guess there is a small utility, AEGG, that's located at American Energies, that's actually settled and been determined. The rest of those cases are pending. Now, there's an important aspect of this that I need to highlight to the committee, and that is we're working on the financial plan of this, but there's another aspect that's very important with regard to these Winter Storm Uri cases, and that is to prepare for the event that we end up with another Winter Storm Uri. What practices do the utilities need to engage in to be able to make sure that we don't end up with the same severity of cost that we ended up with? I will say this much, that as far as our utilities are concerned, they did a great job of paying attention to the KCC's order, the governor's order, emergency order, and making sure that we had heat and light throughout the winter storm. But that came with a huge cost, obviously, and we want to see that does not occur in the future. So I would guess that we're probably at least a year out before we finally wind up all these various dockets, including the practice aspects of it.
Any other committee? Okay, thank you, sir. Oh, did you have one? I'm sorry, Senator Fagg, didn't see it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I notice on page 10, I just thumbing through this, on Target fiscal year 2022, shows 20,000 there, and the 3-year average before that's 336. Target for 2023 is 250. How come that was so low that year? Or for this year, this 2022?
Senator, I'm sorry, where are you looking?
On page 10, number 4, annual savings achieved through curb analysis and involvement.
It's probably probably a typo. That should be 200,000. It would coincide with the target at 2023. I apologize for that. That's our error.
Was that it, Senator? Okay. Any other questions, committee? One question for me. What's the turnover like? I mean, you mentioned bringing somebody up to speed with new attorneys and different people like that.
Thank you, Senator. It's another great question. We have had turnover probably in the 6 years that I've been here, we have lost 2 analysts. Before I came in, we had lost our first analyst. So when I came into the office 6 years ago, we had 2 administrative staff and me. I had to hire 2 attorneys. I had to hire an analyst, 2 analysts at that point in time. And we had obviously a slowdown in terms of getting people up to speed. We were lucky that we had one of the old analysts that we had came back to work for us for a period of time, but about 2 years ago, I think 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, we lost them due to turnover. They wanted to go find a job in private industry. We lost one of our attorneys and we lost both of our analysts, as a matter of fact. So we're back kind of square one at this point. We've been lucky in the last 2.5 years that we have not lost anybody, although one of the attorneys came into my office 3 months ago and said, hey, I've got an opportunity to go work at about $10,000 more than you're paying. And we had to cave basically to try to bring them on staff because we would have been back to square one. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of turnover. When we lose an employee that's been there and it's been trained, you go back to zero. It just takes so long to be trained in utility matters.
Just a quick, curious question. Would it be easier to give your attorneys that are there a raise rather than bring on another FTE and try to retain them rather than the full expense of bringing somebody else on?
If that would work, that would be great. Unfortunately, we can't possibly match what attorneys typically are going to earn in private practice. Like, for example, the typical attorney is going to leave state employment and probably end up with 1.5 times their wage at state levels. We couldn't possibly do that. Analysts are the same way. If they go and work for utility or they work analyst work, their salary is going to be so much higher than we would be able to pay. So it's difficult. And then, of course, there are people that resign, the people that don't really particularly like the work. And so the continuity of just being able to say that we've got 2 attorneys and 2 analysts at any one time, we don't anticipate that we'd ever lose 2 or 3, hopefully, unless something terrible happened. And so we would at least have continuity during that period of time. But great question. Thank you for asking.
Any others, committee? I think what we're going to do is we'll close out the hearing on that and move on to the Kansas Corporation Commission, and then hopefully have a time at the end of the committee to consider any recommendations on the budget.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we'll pull Victoria back up to give us the overview of the KCC budget, Kansas Corporation Commission budget, and Victoria?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm working off the white document with Kansas Corporation Commission written across the front. And similar to CURB, I would like to start off by pointing out that the KCC is entirely fee-funded, so it does not receive any state general fund. So again, those first couple of pages, pages 1 and 2, are summary information, so I'll skip over those. Starting at the bottom of page 3 and on to pages 4 and 5, you'll see some information on a couple of KCC's funds, including their Public Service Regulation Fee Fund and their Conservation Fee Fund. Just to emphasize, these are not the only funds in the agency, just a couple of the larger ones. We've provided some information on those. So to get into the analysis, I'll move straight to page 6. On page 6, I'm looking at agency estimate under the box. The agency estimates revised fiscal year 2022 expenditures of $25.8 million, all from special revenue funds. This is an increase of $1.6 million above the fiscal year 2022 approved amount. And I'll point out a couple of the drivers that are causing that change. So first, item number 2 on page 6, consulting fees. The 2021 legislature passed Senate sub for House Bill 2072, which this committee is familiar with, but as a reminder, allows for the securitization of utility assets to recover energy transition costs and help finance qualified extraordinary expenses. The KCC is granted authority to designate a representative who may be advised by legal counsel and financial advisors to observe all facets of that process. The agency notes it does not currently have sufficient expertise and estimates additional consulting expenditures to meet these obligations. And so that has caused an increase in consulting fees for fiscal year 2022 compared to the approved amount. I'll move on to another item on page 7, so turning the page. Page 7, that first item, number 4, the agency is estimating increased expenditures for well plugging in the Conservation Division. And finally, at the last item on that page, page 7, the governor concurred with the agency's fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. And I'll move on to the fiscal year 2023 analysis. That starts on page 9. On page 9, looking underneath the box, the agency requests fiscal year 2023 expenditures of $26.8 million, all from special revenue funds. This is an increase of about $960,000 above the fiscal year 2022 revised estimate. And again, I'll point out a couple of drivers for that increase. That item number 1, the docket management system. The agency is implementing a new docket management system in fiscal year 2023. And the purchase of that software is causing some of that increase above the 2022 request. Item number 3, so I already discussed the consulting fees that the agency is anticipating to increase in fiscal year 2022. In fiscal year 2023, the agency is estimating a slight decrease from that increase. And so that's offsetting some of the docket management system software. Turning the page to page 10. On page 10, again, the agency is estimating increased expenditures for well plugging. That last item on page 10, the governor's recommendation, the governor has again concurred with the agency's fiscal year 2023 request. And Mr. Chairman, I would just point out that the rest of the document is the agency's budget broken out by program. So if you have questions about a specific program, and it also includes performance measures that you can look at. So again, it's just the budget broken out in a different way. And Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions on the KCC's budget.
Thank you, Victoria. Any questions, committee? Seeing none, I think we'll move on to testimony from Dwight King, chairman of KCC. Dwight?
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Minority Francisco, and members of the committee. I'm Dwight Keene. I'm chairman of the Kansas Corporation Commission. This afternoon, we are going to provide you with information about an overview information about the agency, and in addition, we'll provide you with some more specific information about the activities that we've been engaged in recently. Joining me toward that end are several members of our key management team that I would introduce at this time. Jeff McClanahan, who is the Director of Utilities. Mike Hamey, who is the Director of our Transportation Division. Ryan Hoffman, who's the Director of the Conservation Division. And last but certainly not least is Lynn Retz, who is the Executive Director and also heads up our Energy Division. We have provided you with a 7-page summary and overview of the commission. I think an interesting aspect about any presentation that we make before this committee is that, with the exception probably of your counterpart in the House, there's no other committee of the legislature that's more conversant with matters having to do with the KCC than this committee. We're here repeatedly for a number of reasons, and I think you are, for the most part, very well informed about our agency. I think I will cover it very quickly, but I think you're familiar with the structure of the agency. We have 3 commissioners serving staggered and overlapping 4-year terms. Appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. No more than 2 members of the commission may be from the same political party. I'm sure you're also aware that, and as Victoria highlighted, I think pretty well in her excellent presentation as well, the KCC is primarily a fee-funded agency. financed by assessments, registration fees, operating charges that are assessed to regulated industries. We do receive some funding from federal grants and other non-state general fund sources. Presently, these grants are primarily funding energy education, energy conservation, and energy efficiency matters. We also have some federal funding for the EPA and the Underground Injection Control, or UIC, grants. That's current. Prospectively, we may be receiving federal monies from the recently passed infrastructure bill, the federal infrastructure bill, for the purpose of plugging abandoned oil and gas wells. This matter is currently a work in process, literally as we speak. This afternoon, the Department of Interior is supposed to release publicly each one of the states that's applied for this grant money, the amounts that they're dedicating to our state. We haven't heard that amount yet, but it should be forthcoming soon. As I think you're also aware, the Commission executes its mandated missions through 5 divisions. The first, of course, is the administrative. I'm looking on page 4 now. I don't mean to skip around too much and lose you here, but I do want to cover this fairly expeditiously. First is the administrative division, which of course includes the Office of the Commission and a whole slew of supporting functions you can see there. And then we have the 4 divisions through which really the substantive missions of the Commission are executed. In the process of regulating, we regulate 5 important Kansas industries: natural gas distribution utilities, electric utilities, with the major exception of co-ops. We do not regulate co-ops. Transportation or motor carriers, the oil and gas industry, and to a limited extent, telephone and telecommunications. I think we could arguably add a 6th one there, and I just have to twist the arm of some of my colleagues in-house. I think we could add pipeline safety. That's a major part of what we do, and it's in coordination with the federal agency PHMSA. So that in toto is what we have potentially as a regulatory impact on Kansas, and it's really pretty substantial. Let me briefly review for you the missions of each of these 4 substantive divisions. In utilities, our ongoing commitment is to strive to balance customer and utility interests in a manner that ensures sufficient and efficient service at reasonable rates. In conservation matters, our preeminent goal always is environmental protection. And we do that through the support we provide to our regulatory policies that are mandated, including the protection of correlative rights, the prevention of waste, and the encouragement of the responsible exploration and development of our valuable oil and gas resources. All of this, while importantly, simultaneously ensuring the protection of the state's important freshwater resources. In transportation or motor carriers matters, we regulate the commercial trucking industry in a manner that enhances maximum public safety, while also enabling the essential commerce that relies upon and utilizes these important commercial trucking resources. In the energy division, we focus on important energy conservation, energy efficiency, and public education missions. In carrying out all of these responsibilities and activities, the KCC is committed to the professional, apolitical, nonpartisan execution of all KCC missions, duties, and responsibilities. Furthermore, in all administrative proceedings, quasi-judicial matters, and rate case proceedings, the Commission is committed to the rendition of impartial justice. And in essence, to me, this means simply that the results are driven by the facts and by the weight of the evidence, and they are not driven, the results are not driven by political considerations or preconceived notions or conclusions. All the principal Commission duties and responsibilities are executed by our, currently it's 161 employees. This constitutes obviously the most important resource that we have. We are striving through these employees to provide the highest levels of public service that fellow Kansans have a right to expect. Let me go back to the employees for just a minute. We have a total authorized of 205 FTEs. We have currently on the payroll 161. So that, by simple math here, that's 41 positions that are vacant. If you could turn to page 7 of the handout, we provide some information there about recent commission activity. The top portion of that page is for calendar year 2021. A lot of our activity, as you can imagine, during the course of the last 2 years has been heavily impacted by COVID. Most of our evidentiary hearings, virtually all of them during the past 2 years, have been conducted by Zoom. Several were conservation, many were utilities hearings. It shows a public hearing of 1. It's almost underwhelming by its number, but what that really means is that these public hearings are public hearings that are held in conjunction with rate cases, and there are instances where we invite the public throughout the state to participate in providing input into the process of whatever matters before us, whether it's a rate case, whether it's an extension of a transmission line, whatever matter is before us. If you look at the statistics for the latter half of the page, this is for fiscal 21. So total issues ordered from July 1st, 20 through June 30, 21. You can see the totals there. If we move to the rest of that page, which shows basically our enforcement efforts as they cross-sect each one of the 4 major divisions here. The numbers pretty well speak for themselves, I think. The number of, we have 177 conservation. I will point that out for just the significance that represents. A total amount of over $560,000 in fines. In regulating the oil and gas industry, except for egregious cases of violations of any standard of environmental worthwhileness, we do provide in many instances opportunities for operators to remedy the problems we find. If they remedy the problems in a satisfactory manner, then with respect to that matter, we go away. If they do not, we will proceed to penalty orders. So the irony of many of these penalty orders is that had the operators only complied with what it was we were asking them to do in the first place, many of them would not have been levied. That certainly is not the case in some of the more egregious cases where we had spills that were as a result of total carelessness, beyond negligence, in my opinion. It's important for us to note here, I think, that all fines are payable to the general fund. And as I think I've tried to highlight so far, the agency receives no general fund monies for its operations. I appreciate your indulgence of this overview of the agency. I would certainly stand ready for any questions that you might have, and if they're really tough ones, I have behind me my experts.
Thank you, Dwight. Committee, any questions? Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. King, for being here. I noted that you talked about federal funds that may be available for plugging abandoned wells. I recognize the importance of that. If you received those funds, would that change the amount that you're requesting for well plugging?
Great question, and it will not. Absolutely not. We have a backlog of so many cases. We prioritize the wells according to the risk that they pose to the environment, the abandoned ones. The federal monies will be a help, but it will not, in and of itself, it just will not carry the day. There's no way that it can. So we look toward having those funds available to us. And there have been past years when the legislature has swept those funds. I would hate to see that happen, because I think the environmentally responsible thing is to keep all the funds available that we can have available to do this one major undertaking that can do more than perhaps any other thing to protect the fresh waters of the state.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a notebook that I think is now 2 or 3 years old that had all of the wells listed. I look forward to sometime taking the time to get through your new reports and seeing how many I can cross off.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just wondering how well on the fines that you have imposed on people out there, how well you collect on them. Is your collection efforts, you have a lot of them that haven't been paid. That'd be just.
We do. We have a fair number of them are paid. Ironically, even by some maybe somewhat unorthodox method. We had one relatively large fine. It was in the neighborhood of $100,000. It was paid with a credit card. So across the board, are they all paid? No. But do we take special attention? Do we pay special attention to those that aren't? Yes, we do. Because in fairness to the overwhelming number of operators, which is 99.9% of all operators in the state, in my opinion, who are responsible in the way they conduct themselves toward the environment, we're trying to do the right thing here in preventing recurrences. Thank you.
Senator Olson?
Yeah, you might have said, you work with, these businesses a lot of times. Some of these wells are pretty old, and so when they got to be plugged, when they're deemed unsafe, I mean, someone could be producing it and then later it's tested and it needs to be filled in. It's a very old well. Do you guys work, some of these businesses and companies don't have a lot of surplus cash to plug them. Do you kind of work with them over time if they got a lot of wells, or?
That's a great question, Senator Olson, and the answer is we try to. If they're willing to be responsible, we're willing to meet them more than halfway. And I think the evidence of that is borne out through what we call compliance agreements. If we have operators who have a fair number of wells that have environmental issues or that are temporarily abandoned, if we can enter into a compliance agreement with them and schedule out over the course of X number of years, having them plug those wells, so many a quarter, so many a year, that's a pretty environmentally responsible way to approach this.
So, if you don't mind to follow up,
No.
Some of these wells, as you know, probably more eastern Kansas, there's been multiple companies gone in, but, are you able to get the last operator if they've went out of business? I know we've passed some new laws, but there's some of these wells, they've been abandoned for 50 years. I'm guessing we found a lot of them. What are we up to now? The ones that have been abandoned last 10?
5,400, I believe it is now. It's what we have in our well count and our abandoned well count. These turn up. There'll be more as we go on. More will be discovered over time. There's no doubt about that. I think the important thing to keep in mind, and I really commend the legislature for, I think one of the most environmentally responsible pieces of legislation that's come down the pike in my time, and I'm no spring chicken, is the House Bill 2022 that the legislature passed last year that identifies who should be the responsible party for abandoned wells under a whole variety of circumstances. In the event that any one operator's wells don't fit within one of those categories, the default goes back to the state well plugging fee fund. And I think what's really important to keep in mind is that whether wells are plugged by individual operators or whether they're plugged by the well plugging fee fund, in either instance, the industry bears the full weight of that expense. The industry pays into those fee funds through assessments. And so the industry has, I think, a really important incentive to make sure that there is no abuse of that process, and the default goes with that because, as I say, either way, the industry pays, whether it's individually through the operator or collectively through that well plugging fund.
Well, and if you don't mind, I'd like to follow up.
Okay.
I've seen, hopefully it's better than it was. I've seen operators that ceased to exist. Somehow the T1 didn't get moved over to the new company. They're already in and out. Now you guys are trying to come back and get the old operator. And this guy I'm thinking of would have been nailed for several $100,000 of well pluggings. But lo and behold, a new operator on top of that come in and started messing with the wells, and he got on the hook. But I've seen situations in eastern Kansas where there's some of these older wells where they might go way back to someone 20 years ago that's still a strong company versus the company they sold them to might have went out of business. I don't know. I'm just wondering, have you worked with them guys or
Senator Olson, I think as you suggest, there are so many permutations and combinations of possibilities out there on abandoned wells simply because of the fact that Kansas is a really old oil and gas producing province. Dating back, if you want to take the Norman well in Neodesha, we can go back into the 1800s, but principally from around the era that when the massive development occurred in the El Dorado field, and then around the Russell area also, that dates from 1915 on. One of the important aspects of what we've done organizationally within the Conservation Division is we have 4 field offices spread throughout the state. Roughly 45 of our human resources are in the Conservation Division. Through these field offices, there's one in Hayes, Dodge, Wichita, and Chanute. So we've partitioned the state into those 4 major areas. Each one of those offices now has an abandoned well plugging coordinator to do nothing but focus on this issue full time in conjunction with all the other field reps that are out there. This is really an important move I think we've made managerially to try to be able to cope with this issue. I'm not sure I've been responsive to your question. I've tried.
No, it's all right. I think this abandoned well is just a complicated thing because from late 1800s until probably 1970s, there was a lot of wells that just no one knew they were there until they fracked another well, and then all of a sudden, whose responsibility is it? But I know the state and with well plugging went a long ways, and I was just hoping, just wondering if we've improved the process a little bit.
I'll address that very succinctly. We have enormously. A part of the time that I've spent as a commissioner during the past 4 years has been to go out in the field for a day each with numerous field techs that we have. I want to be able to see in the field what they're confronted with. I want to be able to know what it is that we can do as a commission to provide support services to them so that we can make the whole process more effective. I have a lot of confidence in our field staff. They're really dedicated to their jobs, and I think they're real professionals. Thank you for giving me the excuse to give them credit for doing what they do.
Thank you, Dwight.
Thank you.
Committee, any other last questions? Seeing none, thank you, Dwight, for the presentation.
Senator Francisco.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed you. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just in reading through some of the budget analysis, I see that there were some decreased expenditures for consulting services that had been, I think, budgeted for securitization of utility assets. And is that because we haven't seen many of those cases come forward yet?
We have, that's a bill that you passed last year. We're We have indications that that bill is going to be utilized in a couple of different respects prospectively. But that's as far as it's gone. So the answer to your question is yes.
And then one more question.
Sure.
Because we have CURB and the KCC here and reviewing budgets at the same time, did the KCC also experience additional work on rate cases based on Winter Storm Uri?
Absolutely. I think David alluded to it during his testimony. When this event occurred, in its immediate aftermath, we initiated a separate investigation of each of the 7 gas and electric jurisdictional utilities. And those investigations are ongoing right now. So yes, that's a major factor. That's been a major drain on staffing resources. But the stakes are quite high, and it's important that we dedicate those things to this. I'm really pleased with that the staff is dedicating the kind of time and the professional effort they are to trying to get to the bottom of what's happening here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have heard a lot in this committee about that and appreciate the good work from the KCC and
Thank you very much.
working to resolve those issues.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator. It means a lot.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, Dwight.
Thank you.
Committee, our time's running a little bit short. Let's see how much we can get done before we have to adjourn and head to the floor. First, let me open it up to the discussion on the Citizens Utility Ratepayer Board budget. See if we have any suggestions, any comments, any amendments that you'd like to offer in terms of recommendations. Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have any recommendations at this time. I think it would be important to look at the number of attorney hours that were used when we review this next year to see if some of that additional need was really based on the rate cases. But at this time, I feel this budget should be approved. If you're ready, I'll make a motion.
I think, and considering they're carrying over some unspent money for this year, that would seem reasonable. Committee, any other comments on that? If not, if you'd like to make your motion, Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee concur with the governor's recommendations, and I believe it should be for both fiscal years 22 and 23.
Do I have a second? Second by Senator, motion by Senator Francisco, second by Senator Peterson. All those in favor of say aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. The recommendation passes, and we will approve that budget and pass it along, of course, to Ways and Means. Next up, the Kansas Corporation Commission budget. Any discussion, any recommendations on that budget? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion on that budget. Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that the committee approve the recommendations from the governor for fiscal year 2022 and 23 for the Kansas Corporation Commission.
Do I have a second on that? Anyone? Senator Colson? So we have a motion by Senator Francisco to pass out the Kansas Corporation Commission budget, second by Senator Corson. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Budget passes. Committee, that is it for today. Tomorrow we do have a hearing on the nuclear, actually it's a bill informational hearing from the nuclear folks coming into town. They happen to be in town to talk to the House as well. So we've scheduled an informational brief on that. And again, depending on the situation of the storm, we watch for changes in the agenda for Wednesday and Thursday. We'd intended possible final action Wednesday. Thursday, we have an overview from the Southwest Power Pool. So we'll see how the weather goes, and hopefully everything will work out, and we'll see. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.